I got something great for you guys this week. It's quarterbacks, tight ends, and defense rankings. Let's go ahead and get on into it. I've got all the guys you know and love: Jaden Daniels, Pat Mahomes, Dak Prescott, and Jalen Hurts. They have beautiful matchups. Jalen Hurts doesn't, but he's a mobile quarterback. We're throwing him out there. We don't care about the matchups with Jalen Hurts. We care about it more for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, but not necessarily for Jalen Hurts. He gets it done either way. Going on to the A tier, I do start it off with Drake May. He's got the fourth hardest matchup for quarterbacks against the Tennessee Titans. Now, I'm going to add some asterisks to that because they really haven't played any great quarterbacks. I think he's still a fine play. I've got him as a top 5 option. So don't really let the stats fool you on that one. Now, Caleb Williams versus the Saints. He's got the fourth easiest matchup for quarterbacks. We just saw what Drake May did to them last week. Caleb Williams should have a field day. And then Baker Mayfield versus the Detroit Lions. I'd love to have him just a little bit higher. It's a 52.5 point over-under, so I'm definitely starting him. We need Mike Evans in this matchup to give us a lot of confidence in Baker Mayfield. Going into B tier, we're talking about that same matchup, Jared Goff versus the Bucs. Again, 52.5 point over-under. I want basically every single player that's playing in that matchup. And then I got two guys playing in the same game, Justin Herbert versus the Colts and Daniel Jones versus the Chargers. I'm perfectly fine with either one of them. It's not a game that's over 50 points for the over-under, but we could see a bit of a shootout between Justin Herbert and Daniel Jones. Going into C tier, I do have some guys that have been a little underwhelming so far on the season. Bo Nix versus the Giants. Beautiful matchup there. We really like that one. Hopefully, he can get some more mobility going on the ground. And then Jordan Love, down week last week. Josh Jacobs, I mentioned it. He went wild. And in a matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals, I'm not sure if we want Kyler Murray out there or Jacoby Brissett. Let's just hope that they can put up some points. And then D tier, I do start it off with Jackson Dart. Now, I don't really love that I have to put him in D tier. I would love to put him higher, and you're more than welcome to play him over some of the other guys maybe in C tier. But there's a few things that I don't like about the matchup. One, he plays Denver. They're the second hardest matchup for quarterbacks. Two, it is in Denver. Dart has been getting it done on the ground, which I love to see from my quarterbacks. I don't know if he really has the weapons to get it done through the air. The matchup says avoid, but again, floor should be there with his rushing ability. Matthew Stafford versus the Jags. I talked about him last week that I really liked the matchup, but the weather was probably going to be a component to it, and sure enough, it was. He's a lot lower here this week, probably not having Puka Nacua out there, and the Jags defense has been pretty opportunistic. Sam Darnold versus the Houston Texans. Now, I would love to have him higher. We do have to pay respects to Sam Darnold. Outside of his week 1 debacle, he's been pretty good on the season. He's looked like the old vintage Sam Darnold that we saw last season, just to a little bit of a lower scale. He's feeding JSN. We love that. But the Houston Texans are the #1 hardest matchup for quarterbacks, so Sam Darnold is an avoid for me this week. And then Trevor Lawrence versus the Rams. They are the 6th hardest matchup for quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence has been looking a lot better here these last 2 weeks. Funny enough, Brian Thomas has had his best 2 weeks of the season back to back. And then Justin Fields versus Carolina. Now, this isn't a bad matchup. It isn't a good matchup, but Justin Fields cannot be trusted whatsoever. He just went across the pond last week versus Denver, played those guys, the same people I'm talking about, Jackson Dart, and why he's kind of an avoid here this week. But Justin Fields hasn't looked great as an NFL quarterback, plus he's lost Garrett Wilson. Justin Fields has typically been that guy who can get you either 5, 25, maybe even 30 points. But with Garrett Wilson out for this week and probably next week, he's basically a full-on fade. And then going into E tier, I do start it off with CJ Stroud versus the Seahawks. There's a possibility that CJ Stroud and the Texans have figured it out on offense, but we'll have to wait and see. Aaron Rodgers versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the matchup is great, but I want somebody in my quarterback position that's going to give me a little bit more upside. The floor's good, but the ceiling's not really there. Dylan Gabriel versus the Miami Dolphins. This is the second easiest matchup for quarterbacks. In a Superflex league, he's probably a decent quarterback too, but again, it's been not so great for them. A lot of drops on the Browns offense as well. Michael Penix Jr. versus the San Francisco 49ers. That's a fine matchup. Again, strictly a Superflex option. It's nice to see that he's hyper-targeting Drake London. Spencer Rattler versus the Chicago Bears. It's the 5th easiest matchup for quarterbacks. And then going into F tier, I do start it off with Brock Purdy. Really the only one I want to talk about in this tier. He has the 5th hardest matchup for quarterbacks. Atlanta has been great against all positions so far this season. And then coming back from injury, he's probably just an avoid for right now. You can stash him on your bench, but again, in one quarterback leagues, you don't really need to be doing that. All right, let's get on to tight ends. Let's talk about some guys. S tier, you're starting them each and every single week. You don't have to worry about that. But in A tier, you might have some hesitation with Jake Ferguson, with CeeDee Lamb coming back into the lineup. So I understand that. I think Jake Ferguson does get a little small bump down. So I think Jake Ferguson still gets his. It's a 54.5 point over-under. So I want every single person that's playing in this game. And there's the guy we've been waiting for, George Kittle. He comes back to literally the worst matchup for tight ends, but we're plugging and playing him. The tight end landscape is horrible, so throw George Kittle out there. Just know that the matchup is not great. If you've been waiting for George Kittle, you're probably just going ahead and starting him, but if you wanted to start one of these guys in B tier over him, I'd be perfectly fine with that as well. You got Tucker Kraft versus the Cardinals. It's the 6th easiest matchup for tight ends. Again, Sam Laporta versus the Bucks. 52.5 point over-under. I want everybody in that matchup. And then Travis Kelce versus the Raiders. It's a divisional game here, and historically, he's beat up on the Raiders. Even Travis Kelce last year, when he had already taken a step back, he still beat up on the Raiders. So I'm confident with starting Travis Kelce this week too. And then I want to talk about Dallas Goedert because he's in C tier. He kicks it off for me. Dallas Goedert versus the Vikings. Now, if it's me, I'm starting Darren Waller and Cade Otton over them. Darren Waller gets to play the Cleveland Browns. Darren Waller's been awesome so far these last 3 weeks. It took him a little bit longer in last week's game, but still got it done. Found the end zone multiple times over these last 3 weeks. And then Cade Otton, I already said it. I want everybody in the Bucks Lions game, 52.5 point over under. So I think the targets are going to be there for Waller. I think the targets are going to be there for Otton. I don't want to chase touchdowns. That's not how I play fantasy football. I want to chase the volume with the targets and whatnot. But if you want to chase the touchdowns, nobody's been hotter than Dallas Goedert. And then there's some guys I really like in D tier. You have the 2 rookies, Harold Fannin Jr. and Mason Taylor. Harold Fannin Jr. gets to play the Dolphins. That's a good matchup there. It's one of the lower over-unders of the week, so do keep that in mind. And then Mason Taylor versus the Carolina Panthers. I talked about it in the waiver wire episode. He was dropped in a lot of leagues, so I scooped him up. It's the 2nd easiest matchup for tight ends versus the Panthers. And then next week, he gets the easiest matchup for tight ends versus the Bengals. So Mason Taylor shouldn't be out on waivers, especially with Garrett Wilson sidelined. And then you got 2 rookies. You got the old man here as well, Zach Ertz versus Dallas. I love this matchup. 54.5 point over under. What's not to like? And then in E tier, some familiar faces, but some other faces that are coming back to the fold. Michael Mayer, you'll see, is in red. He is the 5th hardest matchup for tight ends versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not chasing it, but he has looked good when Brock Bowers has been sidelined, and it looks like he's going to be sidelined here again. And then Taysom Hill versus the Chicago Bears. He plays everything. I mean, you've got him sometimes in at quarterback, sometimes at tight end, point guard, goalie. Like, he does it all. So if you want a wild card at the tight end position, look no further than the Swiss Army knife that is Taysom Hill. And then F tier, hopefully you're not going this far, but TJ Hawkinson versus the Eagles, Theo Johnson versus the Denver Broncos, both are top 5 against tight ends. Getting into the defenses, let's go into S tier. New England Patriots versus the Titans, Broncos versus the Giants, Chiefs versus the Raiders, and Packers versus the Cardinals. There's a theme here, all struggling offenses that these defenses are playing. In A tier, you have a lot of the same with the Browns, Steelers, Eagles, and Seahawks. And there are not a lot of good streaming defenses this week. There were a lot that were highly rostered, so they were hard to come across. But B tier is about where I would stop. There are a lot of good defenses playing good offenses, like with the Texans playing the Seahawks, or bad defenses playing bad offenses, like the Dolphins playing the Browns. And B tier is where I would stop, but there is a lot more of the same situation going on in C tier. Going on to D tier, we do have some flyers. You got the Colts and the Chargers. They face off against one another. Again, these are the 19th and 20th ranked defenses on the week, so you've got to be in a deeper league if you're going this far. And then I'll go with E and F tier. This is for everybody in those deep, deep leagues. And that's it for the quarterback, tight end, and defense rankings. If you have any other questions for me, drop them in the comments below and let me know. I go live each and every single day, so make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you know when I do go live. And if you want to take a look at my rest of season rankings, they're in the link in my bio.